participant pool is that the definition of a child and what we think a child means actually does vary from person to person. Maybe it varies from culture to culture, country to country. So there are multiple perspectives to it. And I just want you to be mindful of that variation that we have in our minds as individuals when we talk about the word child itself. So the Pakistani law might say one thing, and then the law itself, you know, there's a different age for a person to be out of the child zone to be able to work. And then there's a different age that the law has set for consent to marriage. So that variation really does exist. And then the religious perspective might be a different perspective altogether. We'll just keep that in our mind and proceed along with that flexibility and the variation that exists out there, because all of these opinions, perspectives that all of you hold are actually important, because you are a part of the society. You make society. So going to now okay, I see a hand raised. Is it possible for you to note down the questions with you? And we'll leave a good chunk of the time at the end of the webinar to take all of these question answers. Does that sound okay with you? Awesome, awesome. But don't forget it. I don't want you to lose out on the question. I want to hear it. Just please do note it down with you, and we'll get right at it. So what is child sexual abuse now? So we've talked about what a child is. The domain or the continuum or the range of the term sexual abuse is often the first thing that's misunderstood. So as you can see, sexual abuse includes something that we call sexual exploitation as well. So it starts all the way from exposure abuse. So if somebody is showing private parts or inappropriate material to an underage child, it could be even a show of visuals through, like, you know, digital or printed images and all of that comes under exposure abuse, and that also falls into the category of child sexual abuse. It could be non-genital contact. It could be an older person touching inappropriately a child, an underage person, or like if there is a gap of more than 5 years or so, technically speaking, between kids themselves. Then it can be genital contact. It could be, you know, being touched or being asked to touch the genital areas. Or it could be something that's called the penetrative abuse. This could be the penetration of the sexual organs or things in general. Now, a lot of the times in our society, as you would see, the fourth type, which is the penetrative abuse, that's usually the only type of abuse that people think of as meaning by or as the definition of child sexual abuse. But we'll keep in our mind that all the way from exposure abuse to non-genital contact to genital contact to penetrative, the whole continuum actually comprises child sexual abuse. Okay, now don't be confused or overwhelmed by the visual here. This is just a visual description of some of the common takes on concepts related to child sexual abuse. So these are like the, you know, the, instead of misconceptions, we'll say these are the dominant discourses that exist out there. And we're going to go through them one by one. So like how all the way from deflection, जहाँ पे हम कहते हैं कि नहीं ऐसा तो है ही नहीं टाइप, उसकी वेरिएशन काफ़ी सारी कि जिसमें आप इशू को साइड पे ऑलमोस्ट करने की कोशिश करते हैं. From there to denial, to trying to say it doesn't really exist out there, to disbelief. So like that's the continuum that we'll try to cover as well within this discussion. So first and foremost, rare and unusual. So one stance out there is the view that child sexual abuse is not widespread. Okay, how widespread is it really? We have bigger problems around. Oftentimes you would have heard people say that, and we go like, sure, but do we really? Let's see. Statistics say that 1 in 6 girls, so every 1 girl out of the 6 girls, think of girls and boys around you, maybe in your family members or in the street that you live at, in the community. And 1 in 12 boys, they face severe sexual abuse at some point in their life as children. We're talking about the childhood there. And if you include the whole continuum, as we talked about, all the way from, you know, exposure to non-genital contact to genital contact, if every type of abuse is included within that, then 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys face child sexual abuse during the lifespan. So I'd say just let that sink in, and maybe even this piece of information is something that we can make a part of our discourses that we do with people around us, to just realize the intensity of the issue that's actually prevalent out there. You can keep the comments coming. I'm sure they're helping you interact with each other here. I probably will be able to look at them in a couple of minutes. So perpetrators as others, that's another phenomena I would like to touch upon. Like when we say perpetrators are people who commit the offense of child sexual abuse. So since we have, like, you know, I believe audience comfortable with English as well as Urdu language here. So perpetrators वो लोग हैं जो जिनसी तशद्दुद या child sexual abuse का जो अमल है वो कर रहे हैं. So अब उनकी बात हो रही है यहाँ पे कि perpetrator जो है उसको हम अक्सर we try to portray that person as somebody else, like, you know, other, जो हमसे मिलता जुलता नहीं है. वो या तो हो सकता है pedophile होगा. That's the term that has been used to focus on the otherness. कि मे बी उसका तो हमारी सोसाइटी से इतना डिस्कनेक्टेड है कि वो तो इस तरह का इंसान है शायद. देन लाइक स्ट्रेंजर डेंजर, मे बी दीज आर द पीपल हु आरंट रिलेटेड टू अस. बाहर के कोई लोग होते हैं, यू नो. This is like outside. So the idea that child sexual abuse perpetrators are individuals outside of the home, outside of the family environment, not known to the children. So एक कॉन्सेप्ट ये है कि बच्चे का, हमारे घर का, हमारे ख़ानदान का, हमारी इवन लाइक मोहल्ले का उससे कोई ताल्लुक नहीं होगा, ये कोई और लोग हैं. And sometimes we blame the culture or the society कि child sexual abuse जो है, it doesn't happen in our community, it happens in some other community out there, or ये जो है ये हमारे लोगों में नहीं होता. This sort of thing only happens in so and so community. कुछ ना कुछ उसमें आगे, you know, we associate it with a certain sector. Sometimes even with poverty, with certain maybe people who are into drugs, they have that sort of a problem. So इस तरह के notions जो हैं, they're also misconceptions, because let's look at the reality now. As the research proves, globally actually, this is not even limited to a certain geographical location. So we actually see that people who commit sexual offenses, especially child sexual abuse, it's not bound by any orientation. They could have any sorts of sexual preferences. It has no relationship. It doesn't predict the tendency for them to be committing child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse could be committed by anyone. Also, 95% of the times, the child knows the perpetrator. So the person who's abusing the child or who's exploiting the child, whichever term you're more comfortable with, we need to tell ourselves and make other people aware of that as well, that 95% of the times the child actually knows, which means that it could be a person within the home, it could be a person within the family, it could be a person within the community, you know, the names associated with it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that you have absolutely no idea about as to who they are. Yep. So I see the chat comments now. That's perfectly correct. You got it. So perpetrators 95% of the times are somebody in the close circle. And that is alarming, yes, but that is also informative, I would say. Like, now that we know and we are looking at this piece of information with an open mind, the idea is to let that information be registered in our mind and then think about things accordingly so that we can take some actions to prevent it or help the survivors heal. And also, research proves that perpetrators aren't bound by culture or caste. It is, you will find the perpetrators to be belonging to low SES, mid SES, high SES. They could be from any cultures, any caste, any geographical location. So you can't really put them in a box that, okay, people who commit child sexual abuse, they come from this particular caste or they come from this particular culture. That's not really the case out there. Okay, moving on to individualizing and excusing the perpetrators. This is also something that happens probably at a level that sometimes we are not even conscious of. So these are the subtle ways certain dynamics sort of come up over time. You see, individual deficits. Oftentimes, people who, yeah, I'm reading a comment here. Exactly. So the purpose of this awareness is to make this information useful for action, positive action, that is. So coming back to individual deficits. Now, when it comes to perpetrators or doers or committers of child sexual abuse, oftentimes, and I'm gonna go to actually the common mainstream media here, उर्दू न्यूज़पेपर ले लें या इंग्लिश न्यूज़पेपर ले लें, अक्सर औकात कुछ इस तरह की ज़बान में बात की जाती है कि शायद कुछ गलत है उनके साथ, शायद बहैसियत इंसान, बहैसियत एक पर्सनालिटी कुछ लैकिंग है शायद उन लोगों में, और मे बी दे आर वीक. अक्सर आपने लफ्ज़ सुना होगा वो दरिंदा, वो वहशी, या what sort of a monster would sexually abuse a child? Statements like that. So when we use the words darinda, vehshi, monster, even like other terms like that, what they do is they individualize that the perpetrator. That perpetrator then again becomes somebody who's different from who we are, in a way that becomes an excuse to almost commit it. So we want to be mindful of looking at these as, so these are like, not the explanations of child sexual abuse. So something is wrong with them shouldn't necessarily become a justification or an excuse for a person to be able to doing this. Let me go through the comments a little. So no one is prepared for such things anyway. I hear you. And so perpetrator can be from family or someone you love as a family. How can anyone be prepared for that? Good questions, amazing questions. Guys, keep in mind, this is just the first of the meeting. We will have a series of meetings after this. We also have specialized support groups for survivors that I'll be talking about a little at the end of this very workshop as well. So we'll continue this discourse to at least let this be a safe space to talk about sensitive issues without the fear of feeling judged. So keep your thoughts coming. Let me hear from you as we keep discussing this. Now, another something, so we've talked about individual deficits, we've talked about perpetrators as weak. So thinking of perpetrators as if they need support, as if they need sympathy, that doesn't really help the cause in addressing the issue per se. Also, like the view that sees that people who get abused, they end up abusing others. Now, this notion in itself, while it may be true in certain cases when you read through the media reports, the thing is, if that's the spotlight or that's the focus of the discussion, a lot of the survivors then have a hard time coming forward, discussing it, for the fear that if I say this, I'll be looked at as a perpetrator. कि चूंकि लोगों को लगता है कि cycle of abuse continue होता है, so मैं अगर बताता हूँ या बताती हूँ कि ऐसा कुछ हुआ, तो कहीं मुझे भी उसी नज़र से ना देखा जाना शुरू कर दिया जाए. And self-image is important to all of us. So hence, that sort of space also needs to be created. It's becoming a barrier in holding honest discussions in the society. So now that we see what's the misconception related to a perpetrator, let's talk about what might an actual perpetrator's profile look like. So अगर वो culture bound भी नहीं होता, वो weak भी नहीं है, उसमें कोई deficits भी हम कह रहे हैं कि नहीं हैं, and they aren't coming from a certain geographical location or a certain socioeconomic status. So what is it that you see in a perpetrator's profile? You see the opposite of actually the individual deficits. Now there's this technical term right here that you can see on the screen, which is grooming. In simple words, grooming is a process of a perpetrator making connection with the child that they plan to abuse, and making connection oftentimes with their families and the community as well, so as to prepare them for abuse in a way that when they do it, then the survivor isn't in a position to disclose it with anyone else. So that sort of a process requires a lot of social emotional intelligence, like a lot of social emotional skills, you know, making connections with the family in a way that that person is thought of as a good person, being in a position or opting for certain professions at times that people look at with respect, so that they have access to kids in that way, so that people don't question them. And I don't want to name professions here, you know, the typical ones out there, and we can bring them up in our discussion later on for sure. We're more than welcome to do that. But the process of grooming shows that there isn't any deficit on the part of social emotional skills. In fact, the whole giving attention, giving advice, or like even luring kids with the gifts, it's a lot of intelligent work out there, used for negative purposes is all that is. And we want to put it out there as well, like while these people, you know, they could be there in a position of authority as well, and sometimes that in itself becomes a challenge to address. But sometimes it's also a blindness on our part, more like जिसको कहते हैं ना कि देखी अनदेखी भी कर देते हैं हम. So you might be catching signs of sexual abuse. You might have a hunch. आपको शायद शक पड़े, लेकिन आप उसको probe नहीं करते. Again, the perpetrator's profile comes into action there. कि उसने जो एक certain link बनाया होता है, एक certain image earn किया होता है, उसकी वजह से, or maybe other social pressures, we can discuss that later. Because of all of that, there's an element of silence. And that harms the survivor, of course, by the end of the day. So these individuals oftentimes tend to be trusted individuals. They are often in position of authority. वो authority ज़रूरी नहीं है कि कोई government level ओधा type की authority हो. वो authority, as we said, these could be people that you go to for advice or you go to for help, or they're just good people in general out there, and they have a positive image for sure. They've like, you know, those authority positions, and that positive image then is actively used to deflect. So even if they're caught, you would see, even if they're accused at times, these people are apt then at deflecting the accusation. So वो अपने इस profile को base बनाते हुए उनके लिए काफ़ी आसान हो जाता है इस चीज़ से कह लें इनकार करना, और या इस चीज़ को रद्द करना कि नहीं ऐसा तो कुछ नहीं है, because that is then on the surface in direct contradiction with the social profile. So that becomes a challenge on the survivor's part as well. We would say that when we say words like, you know, darinda, veshi, monster, we're not really dehumanizing that person here. With all our good intentions, with all our right intentions, because I'm pretty sure when the person who says that out of emotional feeling, वो शायद गलत नीयत से ये बात नहीं कर रहा जब वो perpetrator को दरिंदा, वेशी या monster कह रहा है. Maybe they're coming from a positive place, but what's happening is that you're super humanizing that person. आप उसके जो खौफ है उस शख्स का, वो एक सर्वाइवर, खासतौर पे एक चाइल्ड सर्वाइवर के जहन में बहुत ज़्यादा heightened हो जाता है. It actually magnifies in their mind कि अच्छा these words, because imagine what kind of feeling or emotion or images pop up when these words are used. Monster, veshi, darinda. So wo jo khauf hai, wo at times when we talk to the survivors, we find out that these childhood sexual abuse survivors, they become further traumatized, because ऐसा लगता है कि हम मज़ीद ज़्यादा power ascribe कर रहे हैं, मज़ीद ज़्यादा power associate कर रहे हैं perpetrator के साथ when we say, when we talk about them in those words. So yeah, they work hard to make that image. Even the parents of the abused are reluctant in confrontation. Excellent point. And of course you have witnessed it as an incident, because देखो हम सब लोग 3, 6 या 12 लोगों को तो जानते होंगे, and we have seen the numbers. 1 out of every 3 girls and 1 out of every 6 boys is going through this ordeal, and yet they don't have many safe spaces to talk about it. And why we say darinda to some perpetrator only outside of the family, not someone related to us. अब वहाँ पे भी जो हमारे mental barriers हैं, जो हमारे social connect के barriers हैं, we have to keep those in mind as well. So all in all, the whole sort of brutal image of the perpetrator is doing 2 things in short. They're showing perpetrators as somebody other than the regular normal humans, which isn't really true. And they're also associating really a lot more power to the perpetrators, which isn't helping the survivor either. And last but not the least, let's keep in mind that there are multiple factors that play a part in somebody reaching a stage where they become child sexual abuse offenders. So I'm coming from, like, you know, a mental health counseling psychologist perspective. So वो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि उसके साथ abuse ही हुआ हो, वो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि उसका childhood sexual abuse जो है वो उसको perpetration की तरफ लेकर जाए. There are multiple factors associated with it. And we'll have separate focused sessions on origins of perpetration later on as well. All right, deflections from institutions. Let me have a look at chat as well. So I see you're rightly offended. You wanted to take action against the person, but the family didn't want to. Sometimes it's the older cousins, sometimes it's the joint family system, sometimes it's the nuclear family system. You could be, facing abuse through at the hands of older cousins. I see, and parents don't even notice. And I want to elaborate this thought further, that do parents not notice, or is it like at times they turn a blind eye to it? In drivers, house help, even teachers, perfectly stated. And these aren't easy to say things. So I really want to appreciate each and every one of you who is verbalizing their thoughts right here in the chat section. ये बातें करना, इन बातों को कन्वे करना, थॉट से अल्फाज में कन्वर्ट करके उनको टाइप करके चैट में क्लिक एंटर प्रेस करना, it takes courage on your part. It takes a certain kind of mindset on your part. So I really appreciate you participating here like this. And in cases it's over friendly neighbors. Yep. So we'll have again, when we talk about the detailed sessions on management of abuse or even disclosure management later on, part of the workshops will include this as well. Very importantly stated, at times they just ignore and accept these things. It's very disturbing. Later on, I plan to do a workshop. I'll share that here. Just a thought before I go forward to the next step, because then I want to take all of these questions for which I'm seeing raised hands. So please don't forget these questions. We're going to get to it. I'm going to leave a significant amount of time at the end, more than 30 minutes actually. As rightly pointed out by one of the participants as well, it's difficult at times for parents even to accept, and they choose to ignore, because we need to keep in mind the societal and the cultural norms and values that we are raised with. As you can understand, when something really, clashes with your current belief or clashes with what you believe in, तो वो मुश्किल होता है फिर हर किसी के लिए। वो आसान नहीं होता कि आप उसमें से अनलर्न करें पिछली चीज़ को और रीलर्न करें अपनी नई piece of information को. A lot of people choose denial, and we're going to come to that as well. As now, deflection from institutions. What do we mean by the word institution here? Let me club that. We're talking about all sorts of institutions, including the social and the cultural and the religious. So इसमें हम मस्जिदों मदरसे की भी बातें कर रहे हैं, इसमें हम तालीमी इदारों की भी बातें कर रहे हैं, universities, schools, all of that is a part of this as well. इसमें हम family as an institution की भी बात कर रहे हैं. So family के domain के अंदर क्या मुनासिब है, और जिस तरह ये family as a protected space है, a lot of people say and a lot of cultures genuinely believe that कि जी फैमिली के अंदर जो हो रहा है उसमें स्टेट को दखल नहीं देना चाहिए. सो इफ सम केस ऑफ चाइल्ड सेक्सुअल अब्यूज इज हैपनिंग विद इन द फैमिली, तो हुकूमत का या पुलिस का या लॉ का या किसी भी और इदारे का ये हक नहीं बनता कि वो उस पर बात करे. And this kind of approach is, of course, not helping the survivors. It's helping, in fact, the perpetrators to keep on doing it. इसको आप कहते हैं कि मजीद आपको एक शेयर मिलती है, मजीद आपको एक almost backing मिल रही है कि it's okay to do it. This is happening within the family. Also, making parents and children responsible. Now, don't get me wrong here. We're not saying कि parents का काम नहीं है बचाना. We're not saying कि parents का जो है वो role ख़त्म हो जाता है. Parents have all the role. It's adults who are responsible for protecting the children. But when the whole narrative revolves around just blaming the parents or just blaming the child even at times, because you'll be surprised, there are statements as grave as कि जी blood relations don't commit sexual offense. या आपके बहन भाई हैं, माँ बाप हैं, तो वो तो ऐसा कुछ कर नहीं सकते. When that is a fixed understanding in other people's mind, it becomes very difficult for the survivor to get up and go to the parents or any other trusted person around them to say that this might be happening in their lives. Also, when you say things like if excuse the explicitness here, it is also said that if a wife is not fulfilling the sexual needs of the husband, then oftentimes it is said that the husband then has a right to get those needs met from the children. Sometimes it goes like, gold diggers. So like, people are just making it up for some secondary ulterior motives. कोई और मकसद है इनका, असल में ये मसला नहीं है, कुछ और चाह रहे हैं, इस वजह से कह रहे होंगे. Then a few bad apples, like when it comes to organizations, वो चाहे workplaces हों, वो चाहे मदरसास हों, वो चाहे universities हों, schools हों. Oftentimes these organizations out there, they say कि बस ये चंद एक लोग ऐसे होते हैं, इसमें as such organization का तो कोई अमल दखल नहीं है, इनको आप साइड पे करें, इनको आप फिक्स कर सकते हैं, हम हायरिंग प्रोसेस के दौरान इनको स्क्रीन आउट कर सकते हैं by giving certain tests. And then if the cases are reported, if the voice is raised, sometimes the institution even goes all the way to claiming or portraying that institute as a victim. कि जी इस एक केस की वजह से जो है वो हमारा इंस्टीट्यूट का नाम बदनाम हो गया, या इन एक आधी बातों की वजह से आपने पूरे का पूरा इदारा, पूरी की पूरी उस चीज़ को जो है वो बदनाम कर दिया. So those things then don't really help in encouraging the survivors to step forward, to take help, or to reach out to the resources available to them, because all of this is ready information around us. Even families के हवाले से you might have heard कि जी child sexual abuse, it takes place in poor and disorganized and unstable families only. So बज़ाहिर अगर कोई हंसता खेलता flourishing घर है तो उसमें ऐसा नहीं हो सकता. ये भी चीज़ फिर सर्वाइवर को रोकती है कि अब this is such a sheer contradiction, so what do I do? What's the real side of it? उसका reality face क्या है? The reality is, and where we want the spotlight to turn to, is the responsibility of the institutions. Let me look at chat as well. I see 12 messages. Oh, yes, that's very rightly pointed out here. It's very hard for the victim to understand what's happening with him or her, especially जब कोई गुफ्तगू इस हवाले से अगर नहीं हो रही, घर में बच्चे के साथ कभी जो है वो बॉडी सेफ्टी के हवाले से या गुड टच बैड टच के हवाले से कोई गुफ्तगू नहीं हुई. इवन हम लोग तो प्राइवेट पार्ट्स के एक्चुअल नाम भी बताने से कतराते हैं. So with that shame and the whole hide it sort of approach associated, it makes it even harder for the survivor to talk about it. And of course, correctly pointed out by several people here कि जब हम perpetrators की बात कर रहे हैं, तो the people committing child sexual abuse, they can be males as well as females. It's just that the numbers are lopsided. Statistically speaking, if 99% of the offenses are committed by males, 1% are committed by females. But please keep in mind, those could be underreported numbers. We need to accept and understand that when it comes to child sexual abuse, females also perpetrate. It can be anyone, but I think males are, exactly. Almost 99% of the perpetrators are males, but that's not the focus of the discussion here. And it can happen in everywhere, totally. It's not a bookish thing. Of course, we are not denying that at all. There's no covering the truth in this space. It's just that whatever we say, we'll just say it in a way that gets through to the other person, in a way that information can lead to some positive change. But yeah, the facts stay as they are. Totally agreed. The problem is not just mental or anything other, but the bold. Okay, so they are saying that it's not something that you can blame to a mental health issue. That label cannot be used as an excuse to do it. Totally. Excellent comments. Keep them coming. Back to responsibility of institutions. अब ये जिन institutions की हम बात कर रहे हैं, जो हमारी family भी हो सकती है, work places हो सकती हैं, और इदारे हो सकते हैं religious या तालीमी. The point being that organizational cultures can be of a nature, and actually they are of a nature, कि they are conducive to abuse of power. इस पे थोड़ी सी हमें डायरेक्ट बात करनी पड़ेगी कि मोस्टली आप देखते हो, खासतौर पे हमारे कल्चर्स में, वो ग्लोबली ऐसा है कि जो अथॉरिटी फिगर है, जब आप कहते हो कि you're talking about a person who's heading a particular place. अब अगर लीडरशिप पोजीशन में लोग ऐसे हैं कि जिनकी नज़र में ये एक ऐसा इशू नहीं है जिस पे बात करनी चाहिए, तो उसको फिर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं की जाएगी वहाँ पे. इट विल लीड टू फेलियर टू एग्जामिन द कल्चर ऑफ द इंस्टीट्यूट. And if we go back to our statistics, if 99% of the perpetrators are males, so the whole idea of that imbalance of power when it comes to certain genders, that comes in as well. So while the survivors are of both genders, it's not a gender discussion when it comes to the child cater. Wahan pe it's the abuse of power that is actually leading for all genders to suffer sexual abuse. So जो भी पावर में खुद को इस तरह से समझता है कि वो फिर ग्रूमिंग और दूसरी चीज़ें इस्तेमाल करके उस पावर को अब्यूज़ करके जो है वो they're committing the acts of sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, that's becoming actually the contributing factor here. And because of that whole approach कि जहाँ पे उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का कल्चर इस चीज़ को फैसिलिटेट कर रहा है कि हाँ आप अपनी पावर को अब्यूज़ कर सकते हो, आपकी कोई अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं होगी, कोई सवाल जवाब नहीं होगा, तो वहाँ पे फिर उस इंस्टीट्यूट का कल्चर ठीक होना तो उसकी गुफ्तगू नहीं होती. बिकॉज फिक्सिंग की दुरुस्तगी की बात जो है वो एक्सेप्टेंस के बाद आती है. हम पहले इस चीज़ का एहसास करेंगे कि कुछ है ठीक होने को, तो फिर उसको ठीक करने की तरफ लेकर जाएंगे. And as we would see, it's almost like a collective forgetting that the society is going through and facing, experiencing, suffering, opting for, maybe for as long as the history of humans exist, because this is not a recent phenomena. Because of the media hype and everything, शायद हमें लगता हो at times कि ये कोई नई चीज़ है, कोई नई बात है, लेकिन ऐसा बिल्कुल नहीं है. जब से इंसानी हिस्ट्री है, तब से ये incidents of child sexual abuse is there. It's a collective forgetting that we choose to be a part of, actually. Children as sexual beings. It might surprise some of you, but the fact exists that children are at times looked at as sexually active. And where the confusion comes from is the children's exploration of their own bodies. So kids start to explore their own bodies at an early age. They start to see, like, the gender differences within their physical selves as well. Now, at times, that's made as an excuse to go on to perpetrate against the child. This sentences like, thoughts like, children who do not report ongoing sexual abuse must want the sexual contact to continue. उन्होंने रिपोर्ट नहीं किया तो यकीनन they would want for it to continue. We don't understand कि वो जो बच्चा है जिससे आपने शायद कभी गुफ्तगू नहीं की, सेंसिटिव नेचर की, जिसको शायद गलत बात करने का भी खौफ है, अपने इमेज का भी ख्याल है, तो उस सारे में रहते हुए do we expect for a child to actually just come up and talk about it? Especially keep in mind, I'll take you to the beginning of the session, कि लफ्ज़ child की definition ज़हन में रखिएगा when you talk about, when you try to understand and process these concepts. And then children who act in a seductive manner must be seen as being at least partly to blame if an adult responds to them in a sexual way. Or sexual contact between an adult and a child, which is wanted by the child and which is physically pleasurable for the child, cannot really be described as abuse. That's also a misconception, because yet again, I go back to how you talked about child. You varied with, in your opinion, with regards to the chronological age, लेकिन जो एक ज़हनी पुख्तगी का ना होना, ये जो एलिमेंट है, इस पे ऑलमोस्ट एक कंसेंसस एस्टैब्लिश हुआ कि जो बच्चा है उसमें तो आप ज़हनी पुख्तगी एक्सपेक्ट नहीं करते. Then and especially it gets tricky when it gets to older children. The moment you cross, like, 8, 9, 10, 11, the misconception exists that says older children who have a better understanding of sexual matters have a responsibility to actively resist sexual advances made by adults. And again, here, maybe we are missing out on the whole power dynamic. How easy is it for a child to say no? Have we taught them how to say no? Have you ever given them the luxury to say no? या हम हमेशा ये कहते हैं कि जब बड़ा कुछ कहे तो उसकी हमेशा बात माननी है, उसकी हमेशा बात सुननी है. If you say no तो you're a बदतमीज child or anything of that sort. Consent कैसे expect किया जा सकता है एक बच्चे से? Or if something like this happens, so the first thing that comes out as a response from our society is कि पहले तो लफ्ज़ innocence हमने बच्चे के साथ associate कर रखा था. But now that this perpetration has happened, now that this abuse incident has happened, maybe the child is not innocent anymore. We take that away. The fact, however, is children have a right to feel protected, to feel safe in their bodies. They have a right to explore their bodies, to explore the world in a safe manner. That in no way gives an older child or an adult a right to exploit them. That's their creative exploration. That's their process of growing up. They have a right to feel safe and be safe within their bodies. Let me see. We have a couple of comments here. Interesting, interesting. So we associate an adjective with them. All right, all right. Good comments, good comments. Keep them coming, folks. So let me take care of maybe 3 more points and then we'll open it up for discussion. Because we are now moving from deflection to denial and disbelief. Let's cover the denial and the disbelief spectrum of the common misconceptions as well. So एक बड़ी common चीज़ है कि जी it's not really that harmful. बल्कि it's not the sexual contact with the adult that's harmful. बल्कि when what's really damaging is when the child talks about it and the social stigma kicks in. So when the secret is out, then it gets worse. So the whole approach कि नहीं इसको छुपा लें because इस पे जब आप बात करेंगे या even intervention लेंगे तो it's gonna get worse. And maybe it's the way we react to it that makes it worse. Maybe it's the way that information is managed then that brings the kind of reaction that it does. Sexual contact, let me read out one more misconception here, a really famous and God knows where that comes from. So sexual contact between an adult and a child that does not involve force or coercion and that does not involve actual or attempted intercourse is unlikely to have serious consequences for the child. So एक ये हमारी सोसाइटी का unfortunately even all the way to mental health practitioners and doctors भी ये misconception है कि if it's not the fourth type, if it's not penetrative abuse, rape नहीं है, intercourse involved नहीं है, so maybe it's not that harmful. It's okay, sort of a thing. Absolutely, absolutely incorrect. Need to address that. Traumas are traumas. It's the violation of the personal space, and that's how it needs to be understood. If we really need to respond in a way that will help the survivor and the society grow in a positive trajectory. Also, that sexual contact with an adult, and this comes for those of you who read history or literature, this has a long history. So sexual contact with an adult can contribute favorably to a child's subsequent psychosexual development. So a thought that this is almost like preparing a child for the adult life. And trust me, that really still exists out there and isn't helping anyone. But it goes as far as even the Greek and Roman cultures back in the days. So those are things that we really need to be mindful of. I'll just quote, since this is not a session on impact, I'll just share the consolidated research findings here. And this comes from global data. What I'm about to read applies to all geographical locations, so including the Pakistani culture as well as the West and the African. So child abuse and neglect is the single most preventable cause of mental illness, the single most common cause of drug and alcohol abuse, and a significant contributor to leading causes of death, such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, and suicide. Now let that sink in. It is a preventable cause, as we say it, but it's the biggest, single most, preventable cause of mental illnesses. A lot of mental health concerns arise out of this, arise out of the complicated phenomena right there. And not just that, a lot of addictive patterns, a lot of self-harm, and we might be surprised, a lot of incurable, only manageable physical challenges also have the same etiology. The reason is at times child sexual abuse. So it has a lifetime impact, and we're not just talking about the penetrative abuse here. The whole spectrum of child sexual abuse is covered here. The denial of extent. So अभी हमने बात की पहले denial of harm की, कि इतना नुकसान हमें लगता है उसका असर नहीं है इस तरह से. अब हम देखते हैं कि where's the denial of extent here? Moral panic. The view that claims of abuse are exaggerated, and the response to those claims is disproportionate. कि बहुत शोर बड़ा मचाया जा रहा है, बात इतनी बड़ी नहीं है जितना उसका हवा बना लिया. और इट्स अ विच हंट. मतलब ये तो जैसे पीछे पड़ गए हैं, ये तो जान के कोई कैरेक्टर एलिगेशन टाइप की चीज यहाँ पे बन रही है. और इट्स जस्ट सम ओवरzealous professional, somebody who's just too ready to believe whatever is thrown their way. So if the media reports it, or over time they've started reporting it, तो आप देखते हो कि यार नहीं, ये मतलब ratings के लिए नहीं कर रहे हैं, या they just want to believe it readily, पता नहीं सच बात है कि नहीं है, attitude like that. Now what those challenges do is they don't sit well with the reality of it. Now, the reality of the extent is, and again, global numbers, 95% of the cases, so 95% of the times when a child faces sexual abuse, they don't report it. It goes unreported. And because of most of the things that we have discussed here. And there's this whole element of like keeping hush-hush, keeping silence around it. Shame की वजह से एक social stigma है, उसकी बात ना की जाए, आपका नाम बुरा होगा, खानदान का नाम जो है वो खराब होगा. So complicated phenomena is right there. And sometimes even it doesn't stop at shame. The guilt is induced. So sometimes it's the survivor, it's the person who has faced the sexual abuse who has to bear the brunt of then talking about it. When you say things like, as we discussed, you're just making a big issue out of it. And a lot of the times it's with abuse that's non-penetrative. तो बस उसने ऐसे ही तो किया था ना, इसमें क्या बड़ी बात होगी. That understanding really needs to evolve for better. It needs to be deeper, it needs to be better. Disbelief. So false memory syndrome, it's a figment of your imagination. Memories of abuse are fantasies. They're fantasies about incidents which actually did not occur, or how masculinity as incompatible with victimization. The way we look at the male figure, the way we define masculinity, it makes it really difficult for the male survivor to even get to terms with what they have experienced when they experience child sexual abuse. It is in such contrast कि हम उसको allow ही नहीं करते कि तुम मर्द होते हुए victim या उसका problem को proper problem के तरीके पे महसूस ही नहीं कर सकते, because if you do that, that's going against masculinity, so you're losing the title. So हम उसके लिए उसको इतना मुश्किल बना देते हैं culturally, socially, कि they then have to pick and choose. मैं या तो इसकी बात कर लूँ, इस प्रॉब्लम को मैं प्रॉपरली बहैसियत इंसान फील कर लूँ, या फिर मैं खुद को लड़का या मर्द कह सकूँ सही से. And that's again not helping the society, not helping the survivor. Misconception again big time कि boys are more likely than girls to enjoy sexual contact with adults and are therefore less likely to be emotionally traumatized by the experience. Not true. The impact of child sexual abuse incident doesn't have to do with what you were feeling in that moment, especially if you're, in that age where hormonal changes are taking place. And exploitation is an exploitation, and abuse is an abuse. The emotional impact of it, the mental health impact of it, it's gonna be there. It can't be minimized through one thing or the other. It doesn't go by gender. And children lie. The whole idea that, children are just too creative, they don't tell the truth, bas baat bana di hai isne. It's so true. There's this sentence, acha theek hai na, sabke saath hi aisa hota hai, normalizing the present dynamics. It's so true. I get it. Where's the fact? Just cut to the chase. This is in data from investigations then, because you see, like, there was a time in the West as well when the science was big on trying to detect the truth from the lie. And they had years and years of studies run, and it turned out that 99% of the times children were telling the truth. And when it comes to, who's feeling what, boys ko shayad emotionally impact nahi hota, girls ko ye hota hai. Bottom line, the reality, all children are human. So when we talk about child sexual abuse, we're talking about a human experiencing it, a human going through it, a human living it and maybe trying to manage it. And then I'll let you sort of, take it further. It's then a human, a complete entire human, with their thoughts, with their feelings, with their experiences, with their job of even, growing up in the right way as we have expectations of them. So it's a human by the end of the day that we're talking about. And I would say all is not lost. I see many of you sitting here. I see a lot of people who even helped me with preparation of this, who have been helping me with the research. For the past 17 years, I would say I've been researching in the field of child sexual abuse. I have many people supporting it, spreading the word. So healing and flourishing is very much possible. Hope is there, as we talked about. So the emphasis has to be on the fact that there is a need for children's voices to be heard and for children to be treated as active subjects in their own lives, not as objects of concerns. बच्चे जो हैं वो सिर्फ हमारे पे बोझ या हमारी परेशानियां नहीं हैं कि एक और चीज़ जो हमने मैनेज करनी है. We gotta start looking at kids as individuals, as humans, जिनकी सोच हो सकती है, जिनके एहसासात हो सकते हैं, जिनकी फीलिंग्स हो सकती हैं. So उनको सुनना, समझना, उनको बहैसियत एक मुकम्मल इंसान ट्रीट करना और फिर अपना रोल उसमें एज एन एडल्ट समझना कि फिर हमारा काम तो उसको समझ के उसको थोड़ा डायरेक्शन देना भी है. And then offering spaces to speak and not the way कि जिसमें जैसे ही वो मुंह खोले और हम एक ठक करके एक ऐसा रिएक्शन दें कि आइंदा वो बताने से जाए. So we need spaces to speak which are compassionate, where the child doesn't feel the fear of being judged or being rebuked or getting negative consequences of sorts. So we have to look at the dynamics that create or limit space for victims and survivors to speak about child sexual abuse and be heard and be recognized by institutions. And then we have to focus on the harm that is actually caused, on the trauma that actually existed, and how survivors can achieve healing and recovery. That needs to be the focus right there. We're going to get to the questions in 2 minutes because that's practically the end of the presentation from my side, except that this very important announcement. A lot of people have been waiting for it as well. So since we launched this platform, a Voice of Wellbeing, the virtual online mental health counseling platform, we shared that we'll be offering online support groups for adult survivors, adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And this is the time where it has happened. This is the first of the series. This was a free webinar. From there on, there'll be focused, specialized sessions on multiple domains related to this. The first one is Activating Hope. This is an online support group for adult survivors of child sexual abuse and exploitation. This is going to be a 6-week program. It will have psychotherapeutic as well as psychoeducational components to it, which means that it's a skill-based online support group. It will personally be led by myself, who's a licensed clinical psychologist, as well as traumatic stress specialist, qualifications from US, worked with Pakistani population for more than a decade and a half. And we're going to be focusing on 6 vital skills, but of course there'll be a lot more to it. The 6 vital skills that you will acquire. So people who participate, they will get out of the group. So by the end of 6 weeks, you would have acquired skills around coping, emotion regulation, and self-care. And when it comes to psychoeducation component, we'll be covering effects of trauma on the body and the brain and the mind. Once you register, there will be a session that you'll have with me, just as an introductory sort of session, to see if this is the kind of group that would help you. And then we'll move to the group itself. So I guess this is it from my side. Guys, don't forget to, follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. These are the consultation links as well. So if you need a free 10-minute initial consultation, you can go to calendly.com /wellbeing voice and book a slot there.